part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sabol Brothers on the Baseline Podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing on Apple and Spotify. Remember, follow the pod at Sabol Brothers on Twitter. Follow yours truly, John_Sabol.
And I'm Scott Sabol. You can follow me on Twitter as well at Scott Sabol FOX8. And don't forget, if you have any comments, concerns, if you have any suggestions, drop us a line.
We do always appreciate that. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the pod. It definitely helps out the podcast and our reach for you guys. Well, the NFL draft just concluded, and we're going to get all into that. So no better person out there to talk Browns football than the legendary beat writer for the Cleveland Browns. You've been reading her for Cleveland.com and Cleveland Plain Dealer for decades now. She's been the Browns beat writer since 1991, a Lakewood native and fellow Kent State alum, and a pioneer in the Cleveland media market, becoming the first female beat writer in the city's history. Our guest, of course, is the legendary Browns beat writer, Mary Kay Cabot. Mary Kay, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy to be here.
We'll get to the Browns and recapping the draft in a few minutes, Mary Kay. But my brother Scott and I love sports history, especially history in Cleveland. So we like to sometimes start out our interviews by going from the very beginning of people's journeys, whether they're athletes or coaches or media members like yourself and like us. So I wanted to kind of go back to your beginning of your incredible journalism journey. You became the beat writer in 1991 for the Plain Dealer, and you've really never looked back. What was it like taking over that position? I think I was reading somewhere where you were 29 years old, becoming the first woman beat writer in Cleveland. Is that correct?
Might have been 28.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was 28 because I remember, I think I was 28 and Bill Belichick was like 38. And, he was like a really young head coach and I was a really young beat writer. And I had to go head to head with Bill Belichick. And I gave a speech yesterday at Westwood Country Club to about 180 people and reminisced about some of these, situations and times. And I had to go head to head with Bill Belichick in my first 5 years on the Browns beat. Can you imagine that? I mean, there were guys on the beat where their lips sometimes quivered when they had to ask Bill Belichick a question. So it was a tough gig, but you know what? I was kind of built tough, and I was able to handle it. I mean, I have Kevin Byrne, the former Browns PR director, legendary Browns PR director, said that that I was always able to kind of stand up to Bill Belichick pretty well. And he sort of ended up respecting me for that.
So how has being a beat writer changed over the last 30 years? Take us back to the late 80s, early 90s to now. How have things, I'm sure you can write a book on this, but how have they changed for people who don't understand and really don't know what you do?
Well, it's changed dramatically over the last 30 years. Unbelievably. My goodness. First of all, just from a female standpoint, back in the day, it used to be the wild, wild west, trying to go into locker rooms and trying to get your job done, trying to even get into the locker room to get your job done sometimes. One time I actually had to kick a door open that was slammed in my face on the road. I've had things thrown at my head in the locker room. I've had all kinds of things that have happened to me. So I really feel like in a lot of ways I blazed a trail for, all the women that can go into a locker room now. And it wasn't just me. There was a little bit of a wave that kind of came before me. And then, I was just on the tail end of that first wave. And I feel like we all kind of went through hell so that young women today can do their job effectively. They don't have to kick doors in. They can wear the clothes that they want to wear. They can be themselves as much as they possibly want to. And, things don't happen the way they used to back in the day. So, I said this yesterday in my speech. I always wanted to write the story. I didn't want to be the story. So I never really tried to, go down that road of, this happened or that happened or whatever. I just kind of just put one foot in front of the other and I did my job to the best of my ability. And as a female in the business, you kind of have to go the extra mile and sort of try to do it better than everybody else if you can. And I still carry that work ethic with me today. I mean, I grew up here in Cleveland, Ohio. I went to Lakewood High School. I went to Kent State, but I grew up, in a blue collar, modest home with a tremendous work ethic. I got that from my mom and my dad. My dad was an over the road truck driver. He was a fireman in Lakewood. My mom worked at Lakewood Hospital in the reception area and sold Avon so that we could do things, And so I grew up with this, tremendous work ethic, this tremendous love of sports, never really dreaming the dream of being able to become a sports writer, because young girls didn't dream that dream when I was young. You didn't even think about it. I majored in journalism, but I didn't really think about being a sports writer. I didn't see anybody else doing that. So why would I think I could do it? Now I hope that I, have people that, and I know I do because people tell me this all the time. I do what I do because you did what you did. And I looked up to you and I thought, geez, if you can do it, maybe I can too. And so I take a lot of pride in, trying to set that good example. And now I've got 2 daughters. I've had 2 daughters for a long time, actually. I have 3 kids. I have a son who's 26. He lives in Cleveland here. He works for an accounting firm. And then I have 2 daughters that, my middle daughter, my oldest daughter, is graduating in June, training to be a Cirque du Soleil type artist. She's an aerialist and a gymnast and acrobat and all that kind of stuff. And then my youngest daughter graduating from Ohio State in a couple weeks, and she a marketing major from Ohio State. And I also had to set the example for all 3 of them, really, but especially the girls in terms of you can go do anything that you want to do. You can go set your mind to something and go try it, even if it's excruciatingly difficult, and even if everybody's going to tell you can't do it, you really can do it. So I had to set the example for all the kids too.
And what an example. I mean, if you think of all the encounters you've had in your career early on, because women in media at that point in time when you broke into business there, especially trying to get into the locker room, I mean, it just wasn't, acceptable back then. But eventually doors opened, literally, whether you're kicking them down or not. And now we look at it and it's almost as if, wow, like everybody is part of the media, and the Browns beat in general is so massive, but we do have other women in the media now. I mean, you work alongside Marla Rittenauer, who had recently retired. Mary Boyer also retired. And now you look at the beat. I mean, Ashley Bastock, you work alongside her for Cleveland.com, a fellow Fox 8 former intern. So, and not just that too. I mean, it is growing and growing on the national and local level. And a lot of people should look at you as being one of those trailblazers here in the media. And that's got to feel good for you.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, like I said, I've had so many females in the business say that, they landed in their jobs and pursued their dreams and goals because they saw that I was able to do it. And so that does make me feel good about it. That, the struggle was real for all those years. The struggle was real. Marla would tell you the same thing. I'm great friends with Marla, by the way, to this day. Mary Boyer moved out of town, but, I adored Mary. And then, I love working with Ashley. Now we're having a really, really good time together. It's fun to have somebody, else to, on the beat that kind of understands some of the same things that you're going through. But I do take a lot of pride in, in just making sure that, that I tried to set that good example and try to be very professional about my job and try to go to the extra mile and always leave no stone unturned and make that next phone call and do all the things that you have to do to be good at this job, because it's hard and it's demanding. And, as you guys know, I take a lot of grief on Twitter. And one of the reasons for that is because, I had someone, and it's a little bit of a painful story, but I worked through it with the individual because, once again, I just think if you do your job with character and integrity and honesty and all those good values that our parents put into us, you can work through things. And I worked through this with an individual who, just kind of went on a mission to make me look bad for a bunch of years on Twitter because I had blocked him on Twitter, some years ago. And he really, really, really worked very, very hard with a very large platform, to to do some things that just weren't, that didn't go in my favor. And I didn't even know about this until one of my daughter's friends came over, and I was like, why do I take so much grief on Twitter? And this guy, young man said, oh, you don't know about so-and-so. And I don't publicly want to throw anybody under the bus right now, because
Sure.
like I said, we worked through our issues. But he's like, oh, you don't know that happens to you? And I was like, well, I didn't know because I had blocked him. But that's, I think, the efforts to do that for all of those years made a tremendous impact and really hurt my reputation for a number of years, because I would try to just write, do my job, and I was getting torn down on Twitter all the time. But I think, a lot of that is in the past now. Once this gentleman and I kind of worked through our issues, that sort of ceased. And, things the tide started to turn a little bit. And I think people started to back off from that narrative. And even when I do take some grief from a player, for instance, when I took the clickbait grief from Baker Mayfield, which you guys remember that, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, I write, this, it was actually quite a favorable column about Baker Mayfield.
I remember it.
Right. I mean, if you read the column, I went through and I outlined all the extenuating circumstances that he had that year. And it really was a column that kind of tried to, portray him in a pretty favorable light. So he never ended up even reading the column. He only read the aggregation of like paragraph 23, where I said, if things don't change, if things don't get better, he and his camp might put their heads together and could possibly ask for a trade. Well, somebody took that, aggregated it, threw a screaming headline on it. And that's what he saw. Never even read the column. So he accuses me of clickbait in this, on Twitter. And here was a funny aside that I told at this little speech I did yesterday too. He said, don't use me, to try to put, he called it click, to try to put food on your table. To which my son, Chris, said, I've got news for you, Baker. My mom hasn't put food on the table in 25 years. So, we had a little bit of fun with that, but so in the end, it turned out okay, right? Because what happened? Baker asked to be traded, and everything that I wrote in that column turned out just exactly the way that I said that it would. Now, generally, when something like that happens, you don't get an apology from anybody, but I don't need that. Right. I don't need an apology from anybody. Right. All I know is that I'm out here doing my job every day to the best of my ability, trying to get it right as often as I possibly can. And then you just live with the consequences.
I got to ask you,
real quick,
John. Did Baker ever apologize?
No, and that's fine. I'm cool with that. I would never expect him to do that. I hope someday that if Baker and I ever run into each other, at a playoff game or an event or somewhere that, that we can have a laugh over the whole thing. That's all I hope. I didn't hold it against him. I understand. I mean, these guys are young. I just mentioned, you guys, I have kids 26, 24, and 22. I understand the age group, the mentality. There's nothing that a 20-something can say or do to me that's going to shock me or surprise me. I lived with a bunch of them. I totally get it. I really, I like the age group a lot. I enjoy it. I enjoy the back and forth. I mean, you can't put too many, things over on me. I was a good mom of that, of the 20-somethings. And so when I have to deal with players, I kind of get the whole mentality.
Yeah, I mean, back when you started, there was one medium. It was newspaper, TV and radio. And that was it. And magazine, which is newspaper. Now you have all these streams of information. And I can only imagine how hard it is to navigate through some of that, because, again, you want to be credible just like you grew up being credible and 30 years ago. And somebody takes something out of context, and before you know it, it's on some other platform. And you don't even know that was taken out of context until weeks and months later. It's like a weed that grows out of control in the backyard,
Yes, it really is. And that's why, you just have to stay strong in your convictions. You have to be very professional. You have to know your work. You have to, be very, accurate with everything that you're writing and saying. I mean, if you have sources, get other sources. I mean, you've really got to be on top of it. So if I write that there is a chance that somewhere down the road, if things don't get better with Baker and what's going on in, inside the building, that maybe he and his team will put their heads together and he might possibly, ask for a trade, that you can pretty much take that to the bank. Okay. Because I wouldn't write something like that unless I really worked very, very hard on that. But you're right. Social media has changed the whole landscape, but you have to keep up with the times. I mean, you just have to, you've got to roll with what's going on out there in in social media and everything else. So I need to do more with my Instagram. I just run out of time to do everything. I should just hire one of my children to just run my Instagram account, put everything on there for me, because I don't have as much time as I would like to build my following on Instagram, but I do need to do that. I haven't done much with my TikTok yet. It's just a lot. It's a lot to try to do all that. But I will say that, that I enjoy all the different aspects of this job. That's another thing that is so different from this job back in the day. I used to do my interviews, transcribe my interviews, write a story, get it to the newspaper, and then be done. Well, now I'm never done. It's funny because, now we've got the 24/7 news cycle, of course, as you guys know. And, this morning, actually, I was writing Jed Wills picked up his 5th-year option at 8:30 in the morning. And the other night I was up until 4:00 in the morning on like one of the draft nights, the first night of the draft, Friday night. I stayed up till 4:00 rewriting a couple stories. Then I got back up at like 9 something to go back out there and do it all over again on Saturday. So it's really just a 24/7 news cycle. But I will say this. When I was at Kent State, in addition to majoring in journalism, I minored in telecommunications. Never had any idea if I would use those skills, those, TV skills and radio skills and things that I learned there, because really back then, that it was basically 3, 5, or 8, or you weren't getting a job. You know what I mean? Like there were not a bunch of jobs open in that realm. So I didn't really necessarily have high hopes for doing a bunch of television and all that kind of stuff. Now I get to do that stuff all the time and I love it. I absolutely love it. Now it's so funny because there's so often people will say to me, oh, when I meet people out on the street or in a restaurant or something, oh, I listened to you on, 92 The Fan, or I see you on, Channel 3. And it's funny because like what I want to say is, I have been writing for Cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer for 30 years. Please tell me you're reading something.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Please tell me that you're reading something. So, we try really hard to, to be, obviously to remain relevant and to do all that kind of stuff. And I know people are reading, but it's just a lot of people consume their news in other ways. And I'm happy to be able to oblige in those ways as well.
Well, you kind of alluded to a couple of things there. First off, Twitter is a dangerous place. There are so many trolls out there. They could try to bait you into a conversation. I know we're all kind of guilty of it at some point, whether it's them ripping on you for a story or ripping Scott's horrible forecasts or, whatever I tweet or a bad take. We're all there. You just got to let it go. The second thing you said early on, Mary Kay, you talked about when you first got in the business, how you were in the locker room and someone threw a shoe at you. Now, I'm not going to ask you who threw the shoe, because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I'm segueing that shoe story to tell us a crazy story that you have that doesn't involve maybe necessarily you covering a player or a team, but of when you are not working and you're at a separate setting, whether it's a family function, and you had to bust out your laptop or run to your computer before you had a laptop and quickly put a story online that you didn't think was going to happen that interrupted a family or personal event. There's got to be multiple stories, but if you got a really crazy one.
There are multiple stories of that. And it was actually trainer's tape that somebody was throwing at me, not a shoe. It was trainer's tape.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. And I've got other stories like that, which I usually haven't told over the years because, like I said, I never wanted to be the story and I never wanted to complain. I was always so grateful to have this job, so honored to have this job. There are so few of these jobs in the world, and I was always so grateful to have it that I just never wanted to lament anything. But I do always tell the story of, here, my son, Chris, and I was all dressed up to go to mom prom with him in his senior year at St. Ignatius and, getting ready, to be with all his friends and all my friends, all my mom friends and go have a good time. And Chris and I were just a little bit late for mom prom because I think it was Johnny Manziel was like floating around on a swan or Johnny Manziel was, caught in a bathroom, with a rolled up bill or something like that. Right. I mean, it was just something that he was out there doing. And, I always laugh about that because my kids, they really had to be used to me, just always, whipping out the computer and writing a story. I was always the mom that in the stands at the Magnificat gymnastics meets in between my daughters, both of my daughters were Magnificat gymnasts, but in between the beam routine and the bar routine, I would be like sitting there trying to write some kind of a Browns story. So, it never ends. But again, it's a labor of love. And, when you get to go do the things that I get to go do, you certainly don't want to be complaining about any of those things.
So before you were the beat writer for the Browns, you were a beat writer for the Cleveland Force back in the 80s. I mean, indoor soccer back then was huge. I remember going to games as a kid, at the Richfield Coliseum, Kai Hoskevy, Chris Vaccaro. I just remember names off the top of my head. How was that to cover indoor soccer?
Well, as I jokingly said in my speech yesterday, I was 20 and I was fresh out of college, kind of new on the job when I got the Force beat. And it was a really big beat to have back then. And it really prepared me for the Browns beat because it was huge. I mean, that was a big beat to have to go do because, they were drawing 14,000 a game at the Coliseum. And I mean, it was a beat where you traveled and you had to learn how to get along with players and walk that fine line between all the controversies and all that kind of stuff. And you had to deal with front office and general managers and coaches. And it was a wonderful way to enter the business on a very highly visible beat back then. But I was kidding around at this speech yesterday. I hope people can take this in good fun. Here I am in my mid-20s, not too far out of college, and I was forced, no pun intended, to go travel all over the United States with a soccer team full of, 20 something, European guys. So, it was a tough gig, but somebody had to do it. Somebody had to do it. But no, it was great fun. I became friends with a lot of those guys on the team to the point where, I still see them today. And, it's so great to, whenever I run into, to any of them, I ended up on like great terms with Kai Hoskevy. He saw how hard I worked back then. And his daughter actually, I saw her at a game, at a Browns game. And, we took a little selfie together and it was so good to see her. So yeah, I've got fond memories of those years.
Some are still around here, right? In the Cleveland area?
Yeah, a few of them, not many, but I think it would be fun. I was always so busy, I wasn't able to make it to the reunions, but it would be fun to get, Kai Hoskevy and Bernie James and Chris Vaccaro and, all those guys back together again sometime.
All right, let's talk about some fun Browns stories. You've kind of mentioned Belichick. You've encountered so many great figures in your career. Belichick, Kozar, Modell, events like the move, the return, the lack of playoffs, and then the playoffs a few years ago. Mary Kay, have you had a point in time where you've had to reflect a little bit on what's been your most memorable Browns moment of the beat over the past 30 plus years?
Well, you know what? I mean, I hate to say it because it's not a good moment. But, just standing in that stadium at the last game before the Browns were moving and leaving Cleveland, it was so heart-wrenching for me and everybody else in that stadium. I mean, it was my job that I was, wondering what the heck is going to become of me. This is my beat. And then just looking around and seeing how all the fans were so devastated. And I grew up here. So to have that feeling of the Browns not being in town, I mean, it just felt like, I mean, it would just be easier to just pull up the Terminal Tower and pull that out of town. It was horrible. It was just horrible to have that happening. I couldn't believe it was happening. I didn't know at that time what the future was going to hold. Nobody did.
Mhm.
And, I mean, it was my livelihood. It was, everything that my whole, my dad, my uncles, my mom, my brother, that, everybody loved the Cleveland Browns. So it was a really, really difficult moment to be standing in there. It was surreal to stand in there, to watch Steve Everett, walking around and, like hugging fans and crying. And I will never forget it. And I'm just glad that it had an incredibly happy ending several years later when the Browns came back.
So speaking of stadiums, so as we sit here in early May, the Browns are looking to renovate, the current Cleveland Browns stadium instead of building a new one. I know the fans are split on this. I mean, you talk about this, my brother and I always talk about Dome Stadium and the history of the Dome Stadium projects and why do we have one? Why don't we have one? Well, right now there's no deal is officially done, but what's your opinion on the future of Brown Stadium? Would you see them renovating it, building a new one? What's your take on all this?
Well, it really seems like, after talking to the Haslams and, looking into this as much as I have been able to over the last year or so, that it just doesn't seem economically feasible to try to build a new, potentially $4 billion stadium.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like a state-of-the-art stadium. I mean, that's what it could cost, and it could take, many, many years to build that. It just doesn't seem like that is anywhere in the cards. So I think that even though I'm all for forward progress and new things and shiny new toys like that, it just doesn't seem to be in the cards, from an economic standpoint. The Haslams at this point aren't, willing to finance, just to shell out that kind of money for a stadium right now. And, the city, the county, the state, that doesn't seem to be in the cards there either. So renovation is apparently the way to go. I mean, it could be up to $1 billion just to do that. A roof isn't even, on the agenda at this point, because that's another $500 million. So, it just seems like the incredible renovation that they have planned is what they're going to do, unless something drastically changes in the next 6 months or so, where everybody just says, why are we doing this? Why don't we pivot to this? If that doesn't happen, they're going to go forward with this plan.
We'll have more with Browns beat writer Mary Kay Cabot right after this.
Hi, everybody. It's John Tellage from the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast. Be sure to hop on with us to follow all the dramatic developments of the reigning American League Central Division champions. From game analysis to interviews to keeping tabs on who could be the next breakout star. We'll have that and much, much more right here. It's the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. Subscribe here and join the fun.
What's up, everyone? I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Tybus Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need to get you through the regular season, hopeful postseason, and I'd say off-season, Tybus, but is there really ever an off-season for this team?
Thankfully for our podcast, Holly, there really never is when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. Don't miss our breakdown of each week's matchup, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we know, Holly, dogs gotta eat.
Yes, they do. So hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of the Orange is Oranger, Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
I know it's been an uncharacteristically quiet but good Browns offseason. Out of the free agent signings, Andrew Berry inked last month, I should say now we're in May. I guess it happened in March. Do you have a favorite one, or the one that you like the most, or one that you wish they could have signed?
Well, it was actually not a signing. It was a trade, and it was for Elijah Moore. And I had written, a couple weeks before they made that trade, I have a headline out there that says the Browns should trade for Elijah Moore. And so, I was a little partial to that trade. So yeah, that was the number one thing I thought they should do in the offseason, and they went ahead and did that. So, that was really cool. I think that's going to really help Deshaun. And then, of course, signing Dalvin Tomlinson, that was really big. And, that's going to really change the fortunes of the defense. So I think they've had just a phenomenal offseason. I really do. I mean, they signed a dozen players in free agency, traded for Elijah Moore, and now they come back with this draft. And I really liked what they did in the draft. I think they're poised and ready to go, and they're not even done yet.
Do you expect the Browns to make any late additions during the summer in camp? Right when the weather starts warming up, do you think they'll do anything?
I do. I think they will still do some things. I still think they need another edge rusher or two, maybe someone with some experience. I could see them making a trade. I could see them maybe unloading, a player at a surplus position for them, and maybe getting something in return where they're a little bit thin. They're still a little bit thin, as I mentioned, at the defensive end spot, and also at running back. They should add another running back or two. They lost Dearness Johnson. They lost Kareem Hunt. So I think they should at least add one more good running back, maybe two.
And that was going to be my next question. You had Ezekiel Elliott, Jerick McKinnon, and Kareem Hunt, and we need a veteran. We need somebody, very similar to what happened a couple of years ago when we signed Kareem Hunt. And do you think that happens sooner than later if they go that route?
Well, it could, because now once the draft is over, some guys shake out from other teams. I mean, if teams went and drafted running backs, then some of those guys are going to end up as street free agents here fairly soon. So yeah, that could start to happen where you'll see a little bit of movement over the next few weeks. Mm-hmm. And then again, after June 1st cuts, some things can happen. Yeah. And then as you get close to training camp again. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you see some new faces around over the next 3 weeks.
What do you think about Cedric Tillman? What's your thoughts?
I was very, very happy for them that they did that, because once again, when I headed into the draft, mm-hmm. I wrote a column saying how they could win the draft. And the number one thing I had on there was, or one of them was, to add a new weapon in there for Deshaun Watson. I had like 4 things on there. And one of them was that another weapon for Deshaun. I don't think they can have too many good receivers to throw at Deshaun Watson. They have to find out who has chemistry with him. They can't just, hope that it's going to be with this guy or that guy. I think they need volume. They need to get a bunch of guys out there on the field and see who actually has that natural chemistry and that natural camaraderie with him on the field. And now they've got a lot of candidates for that.
So Andrew Berry went, offensive, defensive line with perhaps the 2 heaviest players. Is there any concern about their weight, or is this something that, all right, we got time for them to make adjustments? Any concern that you're hearing on that?
Well, with DeJuan Jones, I don't think weight is going to be an issue. It sounds like a big number, but he is 6'8", so you can carry a lot of weight,
yes.
Right? You can carry a lot of weight at 6'8", so I don't think that that's going to be a problem with him. And then when you look at Siaki Ika, their mm-hmm. 3rd round defensive tackle out of Baylor, he can play anywhere from 335 all the way up to 355. Mm-hmm. But he even mentioned that he would he played at his lightest weight last year, a little bit at like 335, 340. And that's probably where they're going to want to have him. I mean, he needs to get in the weight room, get a little bit more stout, get a little bit stronger, turn, a few of those pounds into some muscle. Mm-hmm. And then you can carry it a little bit better when it's distributed the right way. So I think he's going to be fine. And when you get in here and you get in their nutrition program and you get in their weight program and you get in all the modalities that they have for health and healing and strength, I think he's going to be just fine.
You talked about that, the healing programs and what they have available now, which is, top of the line, all the science. Take us back to the early mid 90s. What was it like in the training room? I'm sure it looks prehistoric compared to what they have now, but what was it like back then?
Well, I mean, I remember, in training camp, they went hard 2-a-days,
Mm-hmm.
2-a-day practices, and they were in pads all of those times, and there was constant contact. I don't know how there weren't more injuries back then. I mean, there seemed to be a lot of muscle pulls and stuff right now. Back then, I mean, they just, crunched the pads all the time, and that was so vitally different. And they did eat differently back then. I mean, now each guy has his own smoothie designed just for him.
Really?
Yeah. When they walk in from practice, they have a table set up, and they have their own signature little smoothie on the table. I mean, that didn't happen back in the day.
No, it didn't.
Right. So yeah, I'm sure that back then there were probably, probably a lot more red meat and things like that. Now I think they probably try to, avoid some of that, not eliminate it, but it's probably not what it used to be in that regard. So yeah, they really do focus on a lot of those things now that they didn't before, and it's all scientific and they're really high tech and into all of that.
So, the big word, I guess it's kind of a word that people don't like to hear, is analytics, and I've been on record by saying, look, I'm an analytics guy. I'm a science and math guy, and I understand what it does. And it seems as if analytics, people put, oh, well, everything's done on analytics. You hear that word and people think that the decisions are just made using numbers strictly. In your experiences, when you hear about analytics, how much of that is used? Is it just a tool, or is it used more than what people see, and to what degree?
Well, it depends on the organization. The Browns are a very analytics-driven organization. They use analytics, numbers, and data a ton. But who wouldn't use data now? I mean, it's available to you. It's all right there. I mean, if you have the technology, use it. I'm all for moving forward with technology and gaining a competitive advantage in any way you can. Same thing with replay. Replay as many things as you can. Get it right. I mean, if you have the technology, if people at home can see it, why not use the technology that you have to make sure that, that you're getting calls right. So I'm all for progress in that regard. And, from an analytics standpoint, it's really just using data. I mean, if you find out that Nick Chubb's productivity starts to decline after he carries the ball 18 times, then why not rely on that piece of knowledge and use it to your advantage? So I'm all for that kind of stuff.
Now, I know in the NBA they have, and I don't know if they still do it, but I know in practice they have a little, looks like a little microphone, but it basically is a sensor that it scans and it takes your vitals and it Wi-Fi's back. And so they're able to pick up data in real time. I know there's union issues with each league on that. Do they do that in the NFL in practice that you're aware of?
Yeah, they have stuff like that. Yes, they do. They do things like that in practice, and they are very, very plugged into making sure that, that guys are hydrated, that their heart rates are a certain, level, that, that they are, yes, they have a lot of that going on in terms of their, physiology and all the things that they're doing out there on the football field.
Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I think a lot of guys looked at as someone that the Browns probably would be interested in because his skill set matches Deshaun Watson. And of course, maybe not as polished, but similar, mobile arm. And then you look at the Browns needed somebody down the road to be a backup. I mean, obviously they brought back Josh Dobbs, but you need someone more, a little younger that you can kind of develop. To me, I thought that was a pretty solid pick for a guy who fell that far. I mean, and it's interesting because he was the backup of former Ohio State star recruit Tate Martell in high school. And then, of course, his connection there with Cedric Tillman. But I think it was the right move. Mary Kay, what about you? And did you think the fit's good?
Yeah, I think the fit is good. And I wrote a column about this on Saturday. And the column was all about how Deshaun Watson has had some input. He's had a say in setting up the quarterback room. he's got some people in that quarterback room that he's very close with. And Dorian Thompson-Robinson is one of those. And that is by design. I mean, that was not an accident that happened like that. And the same thing with Joshua Dobbs. He has a strong comfort level with Joshua Dobbs. They're very close, very, very close. They've been together, working out together with Quincy Avery, their quarterbacks coach, since high school in Atlanta. So the quarterback room is sort of a sanctuary, a refuge for Deshaun Watson, where he can feel comfortable, where he can feel safe, where he can have some laughs, where he has some friends. And I think that that's very important, that they wanted to do that. They know that he's still going to be battling a lot of off the field issues, that he's going to get backlash out in stadiums, that he's going to see signs, he's going to hear heckles. He's got 2 outstanding civil suits still. So that quarterback room is his safe place. And I think that they worked very hard to make it that.
So with Clowney gone, the Browns, I think you mentioned this earlier, needed an edge rusher. Taking Isaiah McGuire in the 4th round gives him depth on the right side. Do you see him playing much this year?
I do. Yes, I do. I mean, because, they've got Obo Okoronkwo as the number 2 edge, but then there's competition there for the number 3 edge. So you've got 2nd-year pro Alex Wright coming back. He didn't have a sack last year. It's very hard to make that transition from UAB to the pros. So he's got a whole year of starting under his belt. He should be able to get to the quarterback a little bit better this year. And when you have Jim Schwartz as your defensive coordinator, who really focuses on getting upfield and attacking and disrupting that quarterback, those edge guys should have a lot of opportunity to really do that. And the dogs will have a chance to eat, I've been saying. And so, yes, I think that Isaiah McGuire will have a chance to play and to compete and to really get in there and try to prove that he deserves a chance to get those snaps this year.
The Cameron Mitchell pick in the 5th round is kind of cool because you get someone that played college ball with Greg Newsome at Northwestern. And, you're now looking at guys for depth. Obviously, I think this whole draft to me was all about depth. And I know you've been talking about that and writing about that. Do you like the selection at going corner that far down? I know when it comes to like Luke Wepler in the 6th round is depth. I personally think Wepler should have stayed at Ohio State another year, probably could have gotten better than the 6th round. But were you surprised, A, at Wepler falling, and then B, Mitchell be coming in and giving them depth at the secondary, which I know you always do need?
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Berry loves to select defensive backs. So you had to know that there was going to be a defensive back picked, whether it was going to be a safety or a cornerback. You knew one was coming somewhere. You can never have too many good cornerbacks. This guy can play inside. He can play outside. They really like the skill set that he brings. And so, that's something that, again, I fully expected them. I actually thought maybe it would be a safety over a cornerback. But I fully expected them to do something along those lines, and they will cross-train all of these guys so that they can all play inside or out. And then, the backup center, I mean, you don't know what's going to happen with Nick Harris. You can take a flyer on a guy like that late in the draft in the 6th round like that. I mean, if it works out, fine. If it doesn't, fine. Throw him on the practice squad if you have to. Develop him for a few years, get him with Bill Callahan, one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL, if not the best, and, just see what happens.
Okay, Mary Kay, it's time for what we like to call our rapid fire segment here. So these could be as easy as 1-word answers, real basic questions, basically questions about what you like, your favorites, restaurants, stuff like that. You ready?
Well, actually, I must tell you before we get started.
Sure.
I don't do well at rapid fire. I remember when I was on Romper Room and I was 5 years old. Does anybody remember Romper Room?
I remember Romper Room. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I was on Romper Room with Miss Barbara.
No way.
And I was like Cindy Brady when the light came on and they asked us what we all wanted to bring for lunch. And I just stared into that camera and I said, a giraffe. So.
Oh, that's funny.
That's
funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish we had tape of that. I wish I could find tape of that because that really happened. I still remember it. I still have a little post-traumatic stress over that. And so I just apologize in advance.
That's okay.
Well,
no problem.
If we're being honest here, Mary Kay, every time we do a rapid fire with somebody, it's never that quick. It's like, well, you think about something and then it branches off on a different conversation. So we call it rapid fire, but it's more like slow, drawn out fire.
And for anybody of our younger listeners who don't know what romper room is, which is basically anybody under the age of probably 45, put it in your Google machine, check it out on YouTube. You'll be able to find it. It's one of those, what was like 70s, early 80s shows.
We've got to find, there's got to be Miss Barbara video around.
Got to be. I'm sure there is.
Classic, but I have somewhere, I've got little pictures of me and my, my little pixie haircut, and which I hated. And my little jumper and being on romper room, and
that's too funny.
Wasn't good. And yes, I'm more like slow fire these days than I am rapid fire. So
that'll work. Okay. Who's your all-time favorite Browns player you covered? And I know maybe you can't say, but give us a couple that you really enjoyed covering, that were real personable, that you have fond memories of.
You know what? I am going to say Joe Thomas. I don't even have to think about that one. Joe Thomas going into the Hall of Fame this year. He was a Hall of Fame person to cover, one of my favorite people. And as I watched him go through this Hall of Fame process, I, have even newfound respect for him. He's so emotional. I mean, he's just, like coming to tears, and it's so genuine. And he's got a heart of gold. He's such a great dad, such a great guy. It's Joe Thomas.
Well, Joe Thomas, friend of the pod, we had him on during the season, and what a guy. Awesome dude there. Mary Kay, favorite NFL city and stadium outside, of course, Cleveland, that you like to visit?
LA and SoFi. It's LA and it's SoFi.
You didn't hesitate. And you're not a rapid fire person. That was quick.
You know what? Go big or go home is my philosophy on pretty much everything. But I love LA, and SoFi is just like stepping into, the future, back to the future. It's just so cool. And if you haven't gotten a chance to get there yet, try to go sometime. It's beautiful. It's gleaming, and it's so exciting and so fun.
Favorite hobby outside of covering the Browns? No, I know you talked about the 24-hour news cycle, so I know you've been busy, but do you have something that you like to do that has nothing to do with your job that you would consider a hobby?
You know what? I dabbled in golf before I had the 3 kids. I'd like to get back to that again someday. I do enjoy doing it. I don't do it enough, but really more so than anything, I'm a walker. I mean, anybody that lives in Rocky River sees me sort of power walking around here in River. It really is it's my hobby. It's my workout. I talk to bunny rabbits while I'm out there, and whatever other animals I see. I love running into neighbors. I like to look at the flowers in the gardens and the lake, and it's my happy time.
Favorite restaurant in Cleveland that you and your husband and maybe family like to go to?
Oh, I have a lot of restaurants that I really like. Let me think. Let's see. What restaurant do I really, really like? Right now, I'm a big fan of Bar Italia in Lakewood. I love going there. And I went to a similar one that I love to go to. JoJo's in Chagrin Falls is an amazing one.
I've been there. Good stuff.
And then the Blue Point, an old classic, Blue Point. My husband and I, we love to go to Blue Point. A lot of times we'll do that for an anniversary. And sometimes they give us that little corner table there. And, we look out on all the people walking around downtown. So, those are some of our favorites. And I'm probably forgetting, Chez Francois, my friend, Matt Mars. You guys, if you have never been there, okay. If you've never been to Chez Francois in Vermilion.
In Vermilion, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you have to go. Okay. My good friend from high school at Lakewood High School, Matt Mars, my girlfriends and I from high school, we are actually going to go up and terrorize Matt like we sometimes do. We're going to try to go in June and see Matt. But yeah, go to Chez Francois in Vermilion.
Do you binge watch any TV?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, give us a show.
What? Tony Soprano. What are you going to do? Tony Soprano got me through COVID. Okay. If it wasn't for Tony Soprano, I don't know what I would have done. But he got me through. I had never watched The Sopranos.
Wow.
I had never watched it. And I'm 50% Italian. So surprising that I had never watched it. But he got me through, my husband and I, that's what we did. We watched we watched that and loved every minute of it. So yes, I love it. I'm right now, of course, in the middle of Succession with everybody else. Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I thought I was her during my speech yesterday accidentally. Love that. Love Midge. So yeah, bring it on. I love to, it's my fave thing to do after a hard day's work is plop myself down on the couch with my husband and watch something great.
After talking to the bunnies when you on your walk, right?
Yeah, no, everybody's going to think I'm crazy.
No, I don't mean that in a bad way, because when my wife and I will go on a walk, we see, here in Medina, we see animals all over the place, and you can't help but, feel a connection.
I love animals is basically what I'm trying to say. I don't really necessarily try to talk to the bunnies, although I will say, there could be, there could be a neighbor or two that might say I have done that, but no, I love any kind of animals. I'm just I'm an animal lover. So that's one of the things I love to do on my walk is see how many animals I can run into in 1 hour.
So I got to ask you a follow-up to your Sopranos question. Are you a big mob movie buff then, if you like the Sopranos?
Yes.
Okay, so
Scarface, bring it on.
Godfather, Scarface.
Yes.
Have you got into streaming Peaky Blinders yet?
Love Peaky Blinders.
Oh, phenomenal.
I'm a huge Peaky.
Yeah.
I named my Shelby. Where are you? I named my cat Shelby.
No way. That's funny.
I did. I named my cat Shelby after Thomas Shelby. Everybody that knows me very well knows that about me. I love Peaky Blinders. Absolutely enamored with that show.
Are you caught up with that show?
Yes.
I still have yet to watch the last season, or not the last season, the most recent season that came out. I'm so far behind. It's funny. My wife and I try to only watch when we have time to binge the shows when it's cold out, because we want to be outside as much as we can.
Sure.
And so we had 5 different shows that lined up, and Peaky Blinders is the next on the list. So I did just the most recent season. So we got hooked on that, but I love that.
Good. So you have to watch, you have to have the subtitles on though. You absolutely
have to.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if you try to watch it without that, you're just not going to get the full impact. The dialect is, it's so thick. You really absolutely have to have the subtitles on. But I have a small piece of advice for you on Peaky Blinders.
Okay.
For the last part of the season, please don't do what my husband and I did. It just was not a good strategy. All of a sudden, he turns it on, we're watching it, and we're like, wow, we don't remember any of this. We should have gone back. We should have, really reviewed the whole thing. As it turns out, I guess I have to throw my husband under the bus here just a little bit. He put on the last episode of the new season instead of the first.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
And I don't recommend it at all. So we saw the cliffhanger. We were like, what the heck is going on? So then we went back and watched it in order again. And I just got to say, do not do it like that.
That is kind of funny, man. He kind of Quentin Tarantino the last season for you.
Did everything in reverse.
Absolutely.
All-time favorite Browns coach. I mean, there have been a lot of them in the last 30 years.
All-time favorite Browns coach.
You're going to say Jim Schaffner, right? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, wow. Look at that name.
God.
Yeah. I think he only coached 5 games back in before Bud Carson, after Bud Carson. I don't remember, something like that.
Well, you know what? I mean, Uncle Romeo, I just loved Romeo Cornell. He was just so great to deal with. He was a wonderful human being. And that's how I usually end up, ranking people according to their heart and soul and their character and their integrity and the human beings that they are. And I'm really enjoying covering Kevin Stefanski, but since we're still in the midst of that right now, I probably won't count him. I don't want to have too much of a recency bias, although I really, really like him as a person and a human being. I'll give you, the previous coaches I've covered. I would probably say Romeo Cornell just because of the human being that he was.
Yeah, Kevin's a pretty down-to-earth guy.
Yeah.
In the the limited times I've been covering him here now, going on my year 2 with the team, but he's a normal guy that you could go and have a beer with, and he has immersed himself in the community here, going to high school basketball games and obviously football games. He's embraced the Cavs, and really, I think it treats the media very, very fair.
Yeah, and the other thing that you have to know about Kevin Stefanski that you probably don't know is the fact that he is sneaky funny. He is a really, really funny guy, and he doesn't show that enough. And hopefully, as time goes on, he'll find avenues and platforms and ways to let that out, because he's funny and he's very quick-witted. He is very, very quick-witted, and people should know that about him.
Okay, last one, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit. Any funny Johnny Manziel stories that are podcast friendly that we don't know about that you could share? It maybe not about him, but anything else, like a fun little anecdote, something really that you just kind of laugh about now as years have gone by. Joe Thomas gave us a couple good ones, but I didn't know if you had any.
No, I really don't, because Joe Thomas saw him, behind the scenes. I really only saw him, in the, really, in the locker room sessions that we had with him. I mean, the media sessions which were kind of few and far between. And, like he was almost untouchable. You had to you weren't allowed to really approach him at his locker. And, you only got these, very, very limited opportunities with him. But I do remember that I can't remember where I was. It was a Super Bowl or something. And he was out there probably at the Super Bowl, and he was doing an autograph signing. And I was kind of surprised about this. He made a point of, and they were protecting him, and he was behind the ropes, and I felt like saying, okay, like everybody, like get over yourself, because there's going to come a time where he's going to show up for training camp and he's going to be hoping that I come over and talk to him. But it was funny because he came out from behind the rope and came over and gave me a nice big hug. And I thought that was really nice because, we had our ups and downs, of course, and I had to write all the things about him that, weren't always flattering, but I apparently must have appreciated the job that, that I did. And he treated me very nicely that day.
Well, that's good to hear. And on a good note here from Johnny Manziel, as Browns fans can attest, haven't been very good memories or good notes with him, but that's a good one that we'll end on here. So Mary Kay, my goodness, you are a wealth of knowledge and you've been in this market for so long, beat writer. I think you're going to be going into your 32 season coming up here this fall, if my math is correct.
You know what? I mean, when you get to a certain age, you do not count. You do not talk about that kind of stuff. You try to pretend like you're still in your 20s or your 30s. You do not look in the mirror very often, and you just kind of let it roll.
Yeah, that's a great mentality to have.
You talk to so many media members and players, and we love hearing stories, and you shed some good light on some very good ones for us. And it's an honor to work alongside you on the beat, so to speak, and also to have you on the podcast. I know as lifelong Browns fans, as my brother and I can attest, we really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me, you guys. It's fun to, again, wants to, tell some different stories and show a little different side of your personality. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Mary Kay. Have a great evening, and looking forward to talking to you soon.
Sounds great. Take care, guys.
As the legendary Cleveland Browns beat writer, Mary Kay Cabot, right here on the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline Pod. And you can, of course, read all of the Browns coverage from Mary Kay Cabot on cleveland.com or the Cleveland Plain Dealer. If you haven't already, which we know you have, follow Mary Kay on Twitter at Mary Kay Cabot. Remember, follow the pod at Sabol Brothers. Follow yours truly at John_Sabol.
And you can follow me, Scott Sabol, at Scott Sabol FOX8. We're on Apple or on Spotify. You can stream it on your PC, on your laptop, whatever you'd like to do.
Thank you for listening, everyone. And again, thank you so much for Mary Kay for taking the time. We'll catch you guys next time right here on the Sabol Brothers and the Baseline Podcast, all part of the Press Play Podcast Network.